Alright folks, we are back at it again. First things first, I appreciate a lot of the comments that I received yesterday, many people assuming that I felt like broken down or something. I don't know how to say this. If you're somebody that feels genuinely sad and depressed after yesterday's news, I would highly suggest feeling very grateful that that is the kind of turmoil that brings you down. At the end of the day, we are talking about gaming. There is a lot worse going on around the world. Many people's lives are in jeopardy at all times. We are in a very comfortable place and privilege where we can spend our time whining about video games when there's a lot more serious things going on. Now, let's make it clear. This is a serious matter because the video game industry is very powerful and corporations are very strong and they have power over people that just spend mindlessly. But at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, with all of the real world problems go around, this is just entertainment. The way I felt yesterday was more like if a team I cheer for let in a goal, for example. It's like, yeah, that sucks. Move on. So if anybody genuinely feels sad or miserable or depressed about what happened yesterday with finding out the news that the Nintendo Switch 2 sold as much as it did, I don't want to belittle your feelings, I don't want to belittle your emotions. And I am not an expert in this field at all, so I don't even know what to recommend to help you through this. But there are hopefully safe spaces around you and people that you can speak to. Now, seeing as how the news dropped late last night and I had already plans that I was basically out the door on, I got a quick video out just to get it out there so that the haters can come in and make their comments and get that moved on. Today, I kind of wanted to follow up on the news from yesterday and analyze a few different things. Number one, obviously, how Nintendo was able to sell 3.5 million Switch 2s. And number two, what it means going forward, while focusing primarily on sales numbers. So first things first, I don't know how many units Nintendo shipped out. I don't know where they were shipped to. There is still no data available on stock shortages, and with restocks continuing to come in at a much slower pace than they will obviously at launch, I don't know how many more sales are going to happen from now until the end of the month. Nobody does. Now, I questioned the 6.6 to the 8 million that Bloomberg was talking about a few months ago, but it's entirely possible those are the launch units that are going to be spread out throughout the month with shipments coming in all around the world, and the anticipation is within the first month or two, that's the number that they expect to be at. Or it's entirely possible that there were 6 to 8 million units shipped worldwide, and half of them were sold. Now, as far as Nintendo Prime is concerned, he said Nintendo shifted 3 million units on day one. So by that logic, it's possible that they shipped out 3 million units, and that went through the grapevine and got to him, and that was the opening sales, 3 million units. Or I guess, 3.5. The question is how long the Switch 2 will remain in demand, and how many more units Nintendo is going to continue shipping going forward. The Switch is already selling at a fairly slower rate. Units aren't flying off the shelves, they're taking a few days. Now, if Nintendo has plenty of supply available, maybe they just continue to do that and it continues to sell. You don't know. But as it stands at least, of the roughly 150 million Switch 1s out there in the wild, only 3.5 million of those decided that it was worth buying at launch. And at least for now, it seems like almost everybody that wants one has one. You'll get a few more people that weren't able to get it on round one who are picking it up throughout time. You're obviously going to get more and more scalpers out there picking it up too. It's a numbers game for them, so even if they're only making 30 or 40 bucks off of it, in their mind they multiply it by 10 consoles, that's 300 bucks. And you're also going to get demand from people that find out that their friends have one and figure that it's still in stock, and then they decide to go and buy it. I think that's what was happening throughout the opening launch. I don't think many people were planning to buy one, but then somebody told them it was available and they're like, fine, yeah, if it's available, I'll go get it. Proving that, indeed, the best way to move something is to actually have stock available. So, to Nintendo's credit, it was worth it to them to milk the Switch 1's lifespan for another 2 or 3 years while they delayed the Switch Pro so that they can stockpile more units, allowing them roughly the past 7 or 8 months to build up as much of a stock as they can before this launch. Now, the 3.5 million number for an opening weekend is good. But it's only good if it continues at a fairly steady pace over the next few months. Usually, these launches are very top-heavy. I don't know if most stores will be getting shipments in by the pallets, and maybe they are. Maybe the Best Buys and the Targets are all gonna get hundreds again, and Nintendo is just on top of their game. But based off of history, that's not usually the case. Now, going into this launch, most people were guessing that the opening day would get you 5 to 6 million units. At least most people that don't understand global supply chain. 3.5 million makes a lot more sense going forward, again contingent on how many units are available going towards the end of the month. If they get another million and you see them 5.5 at the end of the month versus the 2.75 that the Switch 1 had, then at that point it becomes pretty easy to understand how much they stockpiled going into it. Basically, what I'm trying to get at these launch numbers still don't mean much. We are still way too far removed from knowing what kind of success the Switch 2 could potentially have. And I think it's largely going to be about the hype generated around the console outside of like this internet bubble that we sit in. If your friends and your friends of their friends are all deciding that it's time to go get a Switch 2 and Nintendo keeps pumping out stock as effectively as they have over the past 5 days, then yes, you'll see records breaking. But again, there's too many unknowns. There are still a lot of places around the world that still have Switch 2s in stock. In my area, a lot of stores around me tell me that they usually get 8 or 9 of them shipped in randomly, and it takes a good 2 or 3 days to move them all. And that's on a launch weekend. So while the demand is there, it's still not that intense demand that you'd expect during a console launch. As it stands, the supply is slowly moving towards the demand, if not potentially moving past it in some locations. To put things into perspective, the PlayStation 5 in its first quarter of its launch, which I believe was a 2-month window, sold 4.5 million units. 1 million more than the Switch 2. During every one of those 4.5 million units, it was impossible to get a hold of one if you didn't know how to buy it. If they went online, they were bought immediately. If they got into a store, they were purchased immediately. That was 1 million more than the Switch 2 had. The Switch 2, meanwhile, was easily grabbable on its first day. And mind you, this continued for the PlayStation 5 up until like late 2021. People were still scalping it. We're talking that you could not easily grab a PlayStation 5 well into it having 20 million units. Now again, Nintendo might be combating that by just ensuring they have a whole crap load of stock available going forward. And that might be their plan. We know they'll realistically do pretty well around Black Friday, and they'll probably do very well around Christmas time too. And I'm guessing they have reserves for those. But the question is, what have they already made? And will it sell out? And more importantly, where is it selling out? So we don't have Japan's numbers yet, and I believe we'll be getting them tomorrow morning, assuming of course they will be included in Famitsu sales. If that number is anywhere near over 1 million units, that would make this launch make a lot more sense. In the first month of the Nintendo Switch's life, it sold 2.74 million units. Of those 2.74 million units, Japan was only 600,000 of them, which comes out to almost 22% of the entirety of the Switch 1 population. Let's be conservative. Let's assume that the 1.2 million units for the Switch is all they sold in Japan. I have a feeling they sold a lot more than that, but let's go 1.2 million. If that's the case, of the 3.5 million units that were sold, instead of roughly 1 in every 5 people that bought a Switch being from Japan, 1 in every 3 people that bought a Nintendo Switch 2 is from Japan. And again, this is a very conservative estimate. It is entirely possible that we're looking at potentially 2 million units sold in Japan on launch, which would mean more than half of the people that bought a Nintendo Switch 2 bought it in Japan. Why is that relevant? Well, the Nintendo Switch 2 is very cheap in Japan, roughly $100 cheaper to be exact. The Switch 2 in Japan is the price that everybody thought it was going to be around the world. Maybe even $50 cheaper than you'd expect. So obviously, the percentage of people that are buying it in Japan is going to be more than what you'd be paying if it was sold otherwise. Basically, if you bought a Nintendo Switch 2, you and one other person effectively helped subsidize the cost of the Nintendo Switch 2 for somebody in Japan. Now, again, a lot of this will make a lot more sense once we actually know what the numbers look like in Japan, and what the numbers look like going forward depending on the amount of stock Nintendo has. Due to a lack of data available everywhere outside of a few countries in Europe, we don't exactly have exact figures of sales on the opening weekend of the Nintendo Switch 1. But what we do know is around the world, so far the numbers that have been coming in indicate that the Switch 2 has doubled the launch figures of the Nintendo Switch 1. This is data strictly from the United Kingdom, Spain, and France, I believe. Once again, using our conservative estimate of 1 to 1.2 million units being sold in Japan on the first night, in Japan, they tripled the number that they would have had during the launch weekend because the Switch 2 is cheaper there. It's correctly priced, I should say. And again, that's conservative numbers. That's assuming it's 1 to 1.2 million. And I know what you might be thinking. Who cares if many of the numbers are being fluffed by Japan? If the rest of the world is doubling in sales, then why should that matter? Well, it matters because as time goes on, historically speaking, The rest of the world carried the Japanese numbers. Europe and the Americas would be carrying a lot of the sales numbers, because the Japanese market is a limited market. It's obviously a smaller population when you're putting it head to head with Europe and America. Once the Japanese market slows down, you've lost 1/3 of the entirety of the Switch 2 user base. Again, that's minimum numbers. That's assuming that they only sold 1.2 million in Japan. Whereas with the Nintendo Switch, if you were to take out the Japanese numbers, you lost 1/5 of that market. Basically, if you were to remove Japan from the Switch 1 numbers, you would be at roughly 120 million units sold. But if the Switch 2 also sold 150 million units, you'd be at 100 million units sold. But the thing is, the Nintendo Switch 2 is realistically not going to reach the numbers of the Nintendo Switch 1. Everybody already assumes that anyway. In order to succeed, it's going to need the global population buying in. And I realize they had a record-breaking launch, but a launch of a new console is always only indicative of what you can sell, what you have available to sell, not what you will sell later on when stock is unlimited and the demand begins to wither away. But look, at the end of the day, we knew the Switch 2 was going to have a really good launch. We knew that Nintendo was going to be stockpiling as much as they can. As we've been saying all along, it's what happens going forward, what happens after the new year starts, going into the 1-year mark. I will reiterate what I said before. If a year from the Nintendo Switch 2's launch, we have not seen a price drop, I am still going to be willing to give away a Nintendo Switch 2 to a random subscriber. But I doubt there will be that much demand for it, because even the supply-limited Wii U was able to get 3% of the Wii sales in its launch window while still selling out and being unavailable in stores. And oh yeah, Japan was also roughly 1/3 of that 3%. It's still very early days. Don't let the launch window make you give up hope. As far as I'm concerned, let them make their victory laps. Let them laugh, let them smile, let them joke. It'll just make them look the fool a lot more when reality hits. In the meantime, I have a Sonic Unleashed video for you guys coming up on my alternate channel, Nintendine Plus. So if you're sick of all the Nintendo stuff and you just want to watch a nice retrospective about Mario's old rival, check back there tonight. It should be uploaded in a few hours. Thank you once again for listening, and I will catch you guys on the next one.